The silver ship descended from the clouds like a raindrop, silent and graceful. It landed on the United Nations headquarters lawn in New York, its metallic surface reflecting the morning sun. World leaders held their breath as the ship's door opened with a soft hiss. Dr. James Miller stood among the gathered scientists and officials, his heart pounding. As Earth's leading expert in genetic engineering, he had been called to witness humanity's first contact with alien life. But nothing in his 20 years of research had prepared him for what emerged from the ship. She looked almost human. Almost. Her skin had a faint purple tint, and her eyes were slightly larger than normal, shimmering like opals in the sunlight. She moved with an otherworldly grace that made everyone around her seem clumsy in comparison. "I am Ambassador Rose," she announced, her voice clear and melodious. "I represent the stellar Commonwealth, and we need your help." The world's media captured every moment as Rose explained her mission to the hastily assembled UN Security Council. James sat in the front row, unable to take his eyes off her. Something about her seemed familiar, despite her alien features. "Our species faces extinction," Rose said, her composed facade cracking slightly. "Over thousands of years, we perfected our genetics through careful breeding. We eliminated diseases, extended our lifespans, and enhanced our abilities. But we went too far." She paused, her opal eyes scanning the room. "Our DNA is breaking down. Each generation becomes weaker than the last." James leaned forward in his seat. As a geneticist, he understood the implications. Too much selective breeding could lead to genetic bottlenecks, reduced diversity, and eventually system-wide failures. "Our scientists discovered something remarkable about humans," Rose continued. "Your DNA contains repair mechanisms we lost long ago. Your genetic diversity, which we once saw as primitive, might be the key to our survival." The room erupted in whispers. James noticed Rose's eyes kept returning to him throughout her speech. He wondered if the Commonwealth knew about his recent breakthrough in genetic repair therapy. After the formal presentation, Rose requested a private meeting with Earth's top geneticists. In a smaller conference room, she shared detailed genetic data about her species. James's mind raced as he analyzed the information. The Commonwealth's problem was far worse than she had publicly admitted. "Your species is fascinating," Rose said, suddenly appearing beside James as he studied the data. "You embrace random mutations, allow natural selection to work freely, and somehow become stronger for it. We thought we knew better. We thought we could control evolution itself." James looked up from his tablet. "Control isn't always the answer in genetics. Sometimes the best solutions come from unexpected combinations." "Exactly," Rose replied, her eyes lighting up. "That's why I chose to come here myself. I'm considered genetically optimal by my people's standards. But..." She trailed off, looking uncomfortable for the first time. "But what?" James asked. "But I'm beginning to question everything we believed about genetic perfection." She moved closer, lowering her voice. "Dr. Miller, would you be willing to work with me directly on this project? Your research on genetic repair mechanisms is exactly what we need." James felt a strange flutter in his stomach. There was something in her voice, something beyond scientific interest. "Of course," he said, "though I have to admit, I have a lot of questions about your species." Rose smiled, and for a moment, she looked startlingly human. "Good. Questions are healthy. They lead to discovery. Unlike my people, you humans never stopped asking questions, never stopped exploring possibilities. Maybe that's why your DNA remained so resilient." As they discussed the details of their collaboration, neither of them noticed the concerned looks from the other Commonwealth representatives. Nobody expected their carefully chosen ambassador to show such interest in a single human scientist, and nobody could predict how this unexpected connection would change both their species forever. The first seeds of something revolutionary had been planted, disguised as a simple scientific collaboration. But then again, the biggest changes often start with the smallest choices. 3 weeks after first contact, Dr. James Miller sat in his lab, staring at his computer screen in disbelief. The genetic data from the Commonwealth wasn't adding up. Their problem wasn't just bad, it was catastrophic. "You found something," Rose said from the doorway. She hadn't made a sound coming in, but somehow James wasn't startled. He'd grown used to her quiet presence over the past weeks. "Your people aren't telling us everything," he said, turning to face her. "According to these numbers, your species won't last another 3 generations. The genetic breakdown is accelerating." Rose's shoulders dropped slightly. In the time they'd worked together, James had learned to read her subtle expressions. This was defeat. "You're right," she whispered. "Our leaders thought if we revealed the full truth, humans would be too frightened to help." She walked to the window, staring out at the night sky. "Look at your city, James. So chaotic, so random. My people would hate it. We build everything in perfect geometric patterns. We plan every detail of our lives, even our children." James joined her at the window. New York's lights sparkled below them, beautiful in their disorder. "Is that why you were chosen as ambassador? Perfect genetic patterns." "Unconsidered optimal," she said, touching the glass. "Every trait carefully selected across 10 generations of breeding. I should be proud." Instead, she turned to him, her opal eyes glistening. "Instead, I feel like a carefully crafted doll. Empty. Hollow." James wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but held back. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand. The Commonwealth doesn't just want to repair our genetics. They want to." She hesitated. "They want to permanently integrate human DNA into our species, not just as a fix, but as a complete redesign." James felt the weight of her words. "That's why they sent their optimal specimen, to ensure the best possible integration." Rose nodded, "But they didn't expect me to question things, to wonder if maybe our perfect planning was our biggest mistake." She stepped closer to him. "Your DNA fascinates me, James, not just scientifically. It's wild, unpredictable, full of surprises, like your cities, like you." Before James could respond, his computer beeped. New data from the Commonwealth's Central Science Division. As he read it, his face paled. "They're already starting the integration trials," he said, "on their colony worlds, without Earth's permission." Rose's eyes widened. "No, they'd promised to wait, to get proper approval." "The trials are failing," James continued, scrolling through the data. "They're using forced genetic splicing. It's not working because—" He stopped, understanding dawning on his face. "Because they're ignoring the emotional component." "Emotional component?" Rose asked. James stood up, excited despite the grave news. "Look at this. In every failed trial, they used artificial genetic mixing. But human DNA responds to emotional states. Stress, happiness, love. They all affect how our genes express themselves. Your people are trying to force a mechanical solution to an organic problem." Rose stared at the data, then at James. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe the answer isn't in perfect genetic sequences. Maybe it's in the one thing your people tried to breed out. Natural selection. Real connections. Real choices." A loud knock interrupted them. Commonwealth officials entered the lab, their faces stern. "Ambassador, you're needed for an emergency meeting. Our leaders have arrived at Earth orbit. They're demanding immediate action." Rose looked at James, fear and something else flickering in her eyes. "We're out of time," she whispered. As she left with the officials, James watched her go, his mind racing. He had to find a way to prove his theory, not just for the sake of science, but for Rose, for everyone. The truth was out now, but an even bigger challenge lay ahead, and time was running out for both their species. The laboratory hummed with quiet energy at midnight. James and Rose worked side by side, running their 10th genetic compatibility test of the day. Their hands brushed as they reached for the same sample tube, and neither pulled away immediately. "Look at this," James said, pointing to his screen. "Your DNA actually responds to mine. not just at a cellular level, but at a quantum level too. It's like they're dancing. Rose leaned closer, her shoulder touching his. That's impossible by Commonwealth standards. We engineered quantum stability into our genetics centuries ago. She paused, watching the strands shift and merge on the screen. It's beautiful. It's natural, James replied. Human DNA is constantly in flux, responding to everything around it. Emotions, environment, other people. He turned to face her. When was the last time your people allowed DNA to act naturally? Rose's expression darkened. 4,000 years ago, before the Great Enhancement. She walked to the lab's window, her reflection ghostly in the dark glass. They pair us based on genetic algorithms. Every child is planned generations in advance. Love is, she struggled with the word, inefficient. James joined her at the window. Is that what you believe? I don't know what I believe anymore. She touched the glass, tracing the city lights below. In the Commonwealth, I would have been paired with someone chosen by the computers. Our child's genes would have been designed before conception. She turned to James, her opal eyes reflecting the lab's blue lights. But here, watching human couples choose freely, seeing how their genetic codes strengthen through natural bonds. An alert beeped on James's computer, interrupting them. New test results. They hurried back to the screen together. This is amazing, James breathed, scrolling through the data. When we let the DNA combine naturally without forcing it, the repair rate is 10 times higher. Your quantum stability actually adapts to our chaos instead of fighting it. Rose stared at the results, her hands trembling slightly. Do you know what this means? Everything my people believed about genetic perfection. We were wrong. James nodded, still studying the data. Your controlled breeding program didn't just damage your genetics. It stopped them from evolving, from growing. He looked up at her. You need our chaos as much as we could use your stability. The Commonwealth will never accept this, Rose whispered. They'll want to control it, engineer it, force it to follow their patterns. She stepped closer to James. But that's not how it works, is it? That's not how any of this works. James felt his heart racing. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken possibilities. No, he said softly. Real connections can't be engineered. They have to grow on their own. A sharp knock at the lab door made them jump apart. One of Rose's Commonwealth guards entered, looking suspicious. Ambassador, your presence is required. The Council demands an update on your progress. The guard's eyes narrowed at James. Alone. Rose straightened, slipping back into her diplomatic pose. But James saw her hands still trembling. Of course, I'll prepare my report immediately. As she gathered her things, she passed close to James, whispering so quietly he barely heard her. They're watching us too closely now. Be careful with the data. Some truths are too dangerous. James watched her leave with the guard, his mind spinning. In just a few weeks, Rose had gone from a diplomatic assignment to something much more. And their discovery, that love itself might be the key to saving her species, would shake the Commonwealth to its core. He turned back to his computer, starting to encrypt their findings. Rose was right. Some truths were dangerous, but they were also necessary. And he was beginning to realize that he would fight for this truth, not just for science, but for her. The Commonwealth ships appeared at dawn, their massive hulls blocking out the rising sun. 5 vessels, each larger than Earth's biggest aircraft carrier, took position over major cities. New York's sky turned dark under their shadow. James watched from his lab window as panic spread through the streets below. His phone buzzed constantly with emergency alerts and messages from other scientists, but he was waiting for only one message. The lab door burst open. Rose rushed in, her usual grace replaced by urgent movement. They're here for more than just talks, she said, breathing hard. The High Council. They've decided to take what they want. What do you mean? James asked, though his stomach tightened with understanding. They're going to harvest human DNA. From everyone. Rose's opal eyes filled with tears. They've already started landing collection teams in smaller cities. They're taking people by force. James ran to his computer, pulling up news feeds. Reports were coming in from around the world. Strange ships landing in towns and cities. People being rounded up for medical screening. "This isn't right," he said, his voice hard. "Your people said they wanted cooperation. Partnership." The council grew impatient. Rose moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They saw our research results about natural bonding creating stronger genetic repairs. But instead of understanding the meaning, they decided to simply take more samples. They think quantity will solve everything." Alarms began blaring throughout the building. Security alerts flashed on every screen. "They're here," Rose said, looking at the door. "A collection team is coming to this facility." James' eye. She stopped, conflict clear on her face. "You knew this might happen," James said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. No." Rose pressed her hands to her face. "I knew they were desperate, but I never thought they would go this far. And now I have to choose." Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Military boots on tile. "Choose what?" James asked, though he already knew. The way she looked at him said everything. "Between my duty and what's right." Rose straightened up, her decision made. She rushed to James's computer, her fingers flying over the keys. "I'm sending warning signals to every major government. Collection team locations, ship weaknesses, everything I know." "They'll consider it treason," James said, moving to help her. "It already is treason," she replied, not stopping her work. "I committed treason the moment I realized I love you more than I fear them." The words hung in the air between them as the footsteps got closer. "The DNA compatibility," James said suddenly. "It wasn't just science, was it? We kept getting strong results because real feelings create real bonds." Rose finished. "Even between species." She hit the final key, sending the warnings. "There. Now Earth has a chance to fight back." The lab door shook with heavy knocks. "Ambassador Rose, you are ordered to step away from the human and join the collection team." Rose turned to James, touching his face gently. "I'm so sorry for my part in this, but I'm going to help fix it." She pressed something into his hand, a small data crystal. "Everything we discovered about natural genetic bonding. The real solution, not their forced harvesting. Open this door immediately." "Come with me," James said quickly. "We can hide you, protect you." Rose shook her head, smiling sadly. "No. I need to be on their command ship. Someone has to slow them down from the inside." She stepped back, squaring her shoulders. "And James, thank you for teaching me that some things are worth fighting for." The door burst open. Commonwealth soldiers poured in, weapons raised. But Rose was already moving, placing herself between them and James. She stood tall, her voice carrying the authority of her position. "Stop. This isn't the way. And I can prove it." The soldiers hesitated, their weapons wavering between Rose and James as alarms continued to blare throughout the building. The moment of crisis had arrived, and everything would change from here. The United Nations emergency session buzzed with fear and anger. On screens around the chamber, reports showed Commonwealth collection teams advancing across the globe. But in the center of the storm, Dr. James Miller stood calmly at the podium, holding up a small data crystal. "We don't need to fight," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber. "We have something better than weapons. We have proof that there's another way." The Secretary General leaned forward. "Dr. Miller, they're abducting our people. What could be better than defending ourselves?" James plugged the crystal into the chamber's main display. Rose's research filled the screens. Charts, data, and most importantly, results. "The Commonwealth thinks they can force genetic compatibility," James explained. "But Ambassador Rose and I discovered something revolutionary. When humans and Commonwealth citizens form natural bonds, friendships, relationships, real connections, the genetic repair rate increases tenfold." Murmurs filled the chamber. On the screens, more Commonwealth ships appeared over cities. Are you suggesting we just make friends with them? A military commander asked, his voice heavy with disbelief. I'm suggesting we volunteer, James replied. Not as test subjects, but as partners, equal participants in a mutual exchange. The chamber erupted in argument. James raised his hand for silence. Think about it. What makes humans different from them? We embrace chaos. We form random connections. We fall in love without genetic algorithms. And our DNA is stronger for it. He pointed to the data displays. Look at these results. When Commonwealth DNA mingles with ours naturally, both species become stronger. Their rigid structure gains flexibility. Our chaotic patterns gain stability. But it only works if both sides choose it freely. And you expect their military to just accept this? Someone called out. James smiled. No, I expect their people to demand it. He pressed another button. The screens changed to show messages, thousands of them, from Commonwealth citizens, all asking about the rumors of successful genetic bonding on Earth, all wondering why their leadership was choosing force over cooperation. Ambassador Rose isn't just helping us, James continued. She's broadcasting our findings to every Commonwealth world. Their people are learning that their leaders lied, that there's a better way than forced collection. The Secretary General studied the messages. How do we know this will work? Because it already has. James brought up his and Rose's original test results. What you're seeing isn't just science. It's proof that our species can do more than just survive together. We can help each other thrive. A young diplomat stood up. I volunteer, she said firmly. If it means stopping this invasion peacefully, I'll participate in the exchange program. Another delegate raised his hand, then another, and another. James watched as hands rose across the chamber. On the screens, reports began coming in from around the world. Humans stepping forward, offering to help. Not out of fear, but out of choice, out of hope. His phone buzzed. A message from Rose. It's working. The fleet is receiving thousands of messages from home. The council is losing control. He looked up at the chamber, at all the raised hands, at all the people choosing to help rather than fight. This was humanity at its best, facing a crisis not with weapons, but with open hands and willing hearts. Tell the Commonwealth, he announced, that Earth is ready for real cooperation, not as specimens, but as equals, not through force, but through free choice. The Secretary General nodded slowly. And what about Ambassador Rose? Her people will consider her a traitor. No, James said firmly. They'll remember her as the one who showed both our species a better path. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting against something. It's standing up for what's right. Above the city, the Commonwealth ships remained. But now they waited, as a revolution of choice and freedom spread through their fleet, sparked by human willingness to help, even in the face of threat. The invasion had become an invitation, and humanity had answered with its greatest strength, the power to choose connection over conflict. News spread through the Commonwealth fleet like wildfire. In the command ship's communication center, Rose stood surrounded by holographic screens, each showing different worlds of the Commonwealth erupting in peaceful protest. Her people, famous for their order and control, were choosing chaos. Look at this, she said to the fleet commander. 12 major colony worlds have already voted to end forced breeding programs. They want what Earth is offering. The commander, an older male with silver-tinted skin, watched the screens with growing concern. This goes against everything we built, everything we are. No, Rose replied firmly. This is who we were meant to be, before we caged ourselves in false perfection. On the screens, more reports poured in. Commonwealth scientists publishing their own research supporting Rose's findings. Young couples demanding the right to choose their own mates. Parents asking for natural conception options. Below them, in New York's largest park, something remarkable was happening. Hundreds of humans and Commonwealth citizens met in the open air, talking, learning about each other. Natural bonds forming without any genetic algorithms or forced matching. James walked through the crowd, documenting every successful interaction. His phone couldn't keep up with all the incoming data. Each new friendship, each genuine connection, produced stronger genetic compatibility than any forced pairing. Dr. Miller, a young Commonwealth scientist, waved him over. "You need to see this. We just tested a group that's been talking for only 2 hours. The genetic repair rate is higher than anything our breeding programs achieved in centuries." James smiled, watching humans and aliens sharing food, showing each other pictures, laughing at universal jokes. "It's not about the genetics," he said. "It's about the connections. Real feelings create real changes, right down to the DNA level." His phone buzzed. A message from Rose. "Turn on the main news feed now." The park's big screens lit up with an emergency broadcast. The High Council of the Commonwealth appeared, their faces stern but resigned. "In light of recent developments," the head counselor announced, "we are officially ending the forced DNA collection program on Earth. Furthermore, all breeding restrictions across the Commonwealth are hereby suspended, pending review." The crowd erupted in cheers. Humans hugged their new Commonwealth friends. Some cried with relief. But the announcement wasn't finished. Ambassador Rose, the head counselor, continued, "Your actions were unauthorized." But he paused, looking uncomfortable with the words, "Your results are undeniable. The Council requests your continuation as lead researcher on the Voluntary Genetic Exchange Program, together with Dr. James Miller." James felt his heart leap. Rose had been vindicated. Their work would continue, not in secret, but with full support. His phone buzzed again. "Meet me on the command ship," Rose's message read. "There's something you need to see." An hour later, James stood in the ship's main genetics lab, staring at a display that took up an entire wall. It showed the combined DNA patterns of every successful human Commonwealth interaction from the park. "It's beautiful," Rose said, standing close to him. "Look at how the patterns flow together. No force, no control, just natural harmony." "Your people really didn't expect this, did they?" James asked. "They didn't think humans would volunteer to help, even after they tried to force us." Rose shook her head. "They didn't understand that true strength comes from choice, from freedom." She turned to him, her opal eyes shining. "But they're learning. Look." She gestured to another screen, showing Commonwealth couples on various worlds holding hands in public, young ones choosing their own paths, adults questioning the old ways. "We're not just solving our genetic problems," Rose said softly. "We're healing something much deeper. We're remembering how to be free." James watched the revolution unfold across the screens. A revolution not of violence, but of choice, of love, of life finding its own way. And beside him stood the proof that two species, no matter how different, could choose to be stronger together than apart. 1 year had passed since first contact. The New York skyline had changed. Commonwealth architecture blending with human buildings in an elegant dance of order and chaos, the same way their species had learned to blend together. James stood in his expanded laboratory, now occupying an entire floor of the United Nations Science Center. Around him, human and Commonwealth scientists worked side by side, studying the miracle that had saved both their species. "The latest results are in," his assistant called out, a young Commonwealth researcher whose skin had a blue tint. "Natural conception rates are up 300% across all colonies. Genetic degradation has completely stopped in participating populations." James nodded, but his attention was on the medical bay door. Behind it, something unprecedented was happening. Rose lay in the medical chamber, surrounded by the best doctors from both species. After months of preparation and testing, she had chosen to bear a child. Their child. The first naturally conceived human Commonwealth hybrid. The door opened. The head doctor emerged, her face breaking into a smile. "Congratulations, Dr. Miller," she said. "You have a daughter." James rushed inside. Rose lay on the bed, tired but glowing, holding a tiny bundle. Their baby girl had Rose's opal eyes, but James's warm skin tone. She was perfect, not by Commonwealth standards, but by the only standard that mattered now. She was alive, healthy, and free to be herself. "She's beautiful," James whispered, touching his daughter's tiny hand. "She's hope," Rose replied softly. "Living proof that life finds a way, if we just let it." On screens around the medical bay, news feeds showed similar scenes playing out across Earth and the Commonwealth. Mixed couples celebrating their own children. Young people choosing partners based on connection rather than genetic algorithms. A new generation being born into freedom. The High Council had transformed too. Young leaders replaced the old guard, bringing fresh ideas about genetics and society. They called it the Great Liberation, the day they stopped trying to control evolution and started participating in it instead. Ambassador Rose, a nurse, entered with a data pad. "The council sends their congratulations. They've asked to name your daughter an official symbol of unity, the first of a new era." Rose looked at James, then down at their sleeping child. "Tell them thank you." But no, she doesn't need to be a symbol. She just needs to be herself. The nurse smiled and left. Through the window, they could see the sunset painting the hybrid city in gold. Commonwealth ships no longer looked threatening in the sky. They were just another part of daily life, coming and going with traders, tourists, and families. "Did you ever imagine this?" James asked, sitting beside them. "When you first landed on Earth?" Rose laughed softly. "I came looking for genetic material to save my species. Instead, I found something that saved our souls." She touched their daughter's cheek. "We thought we needed human DNA. But what we really needed was human hearts. Your chaos, your freedom to choose, your ability to love without calculations. And we needed you too," James added. "Your knowledge, your courage to question everything you knew, your willingness to choose a different path." Their daughter made a small sound, opening her opal eyes to the world. A world where she would never know the rigid control of the old Commonwealth, where she could choose her own path, love freely, and be part of something greater than genetic perfection. "What should we call her?" James asked. Rose smiled. "Hope," she said simply, "because that's what she is. Hope for both our species. Hope for the future." Outside, more Commonwealth ships arrived, bringing new volunteers, new possibilities. But inside the medical bay, a family simply held each other, proving that sometimes the biggest changes in history don't come from grand plans or forced programs. They come from simple choices, from letting go of control, from letting love find its own way. And in the end, that was the greatest lesson both species learned. That perfection isn't found in rigid patterns or controlled breeding, but in the beautiful chaos of hearts choosing each other, again and again, across the stars.